Well, welcome to our monthly Association Essentials Series course today. And today's topic is reserve studies. A reminder, you can go to our website, HOALiving.com, to find previous sessions that we've recorded on many different topics over the years, also on our YouTube channel. But at the website, go to Training Association Essentials Series, scroll below the upcoming schedule, and you'll see previous sessions recordings. Click on that link. You have a little icon to everything that's available. Speaking of upcoming events for the rest of this year, at the end of August, we'll be doing proactive communication in your association. October Insurance 101, something that we feel is important to repeat annually. And in the end of October, very interesting, business partner strategies. Our business partners are all the vendors and contractors and professionals and specialists that you use when managing your community. All these are at 2 o'clock Eastern, 11 o'clock Pacific, and here in the Mountain Time Zone, that's noon, 1 o'clock Central. Just a reminder, if you're watching this live, today is the last day to apply for our HOA Living College Scholarships for the 2023-2024 school year. $2,500 scholarship. It's a short essay. There's a QR code right there, but you got to be watching this live, because if you're watching it recorded, this contest is over, but look for details for the upcoming year. Many different ways to connect with us through social media, our monthly e-newsletter for board members called Community Scoop, through our website, HOALiving.com, or there's the QR code for our YouTube channel. You can pause this video and scan those QR codes if you need more time. And to introduce myself, if you are unaware, my name is Michael Johnson. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm proud to be the CEO of the HOA Living Companies and a member of the CAI National Board of Trustees. You can reach me through my LinkedIn profile. Once again, handy dandy QR code right there. All right, let's jump into today's topic on reserve studies. Such an important topic, really receiving a lot of attention in the last couple of years through tragic events, through the Surfside condo collapse in Florida 2 years ago, lost about 100 lives. And although that's not a pure reserve study issue, it brought up our industry updating standards and expectations when it comes to reserve studies. Rob Nordland, who is the founder and CEO of Association Reserves, said that deterioration is constant. It's expensive, but it is predictable. So the board should be setting aside funds on an ongoing basis to offset that deterioration. Today, we're going to go through a lot of terms in the process that is used for reserve study development, implementation, use, how it's going to be in your association. What are reserve funds? Our documents ask us to set aside reserve funds. And so what are they? Well, they're funds set aside by your association for future maintenance and repairs, for components that the association's responsible for. Adequate reserve funds limit the need for dramatic assessment increases or the dreaded special assessment. A reserve study, then, is an in-depth evaluation of a community's physical components, an analysis of the cost and the time frame for anticipated replacement. It's a budgeting tool. It may be the most important and definitely probably the most expensive part of a budget. Earlier this year, we did a Financials 101 AES on budgeting, on financials and budgeting, and a big part of that program is on budgeting. So feel free, you can scan that QR code, it'll take you right to that program. That's a great way to get a catch up on budgeting tools. So why do associations need to reserve? Well, one, we want to protect and enhance our assets that are owned by the association. Meaning, if we have a clubhouse or a pool or the building exterior of our living units, of course, then our job as association board members is to protect and enhance those assets. Fairness, right? We got the scale here. Well, what does that mean? Well, if I move into a brand new condominium building, newly built construction, and I know the roof at the top of this building is going to last 30 years. Well, you know, the penny pincher in me says, I don't need to save for that roof today. It's going to be 30 years before it's replaced. And let's just say that it's a $3 million roof. So we need to be saving approximately $100,000 a year over 30 years. And at the end of that 30 years, we're going to have the $3 million we need to replace it. Well, I get to benefit from the roof above my head for the 18 months or 3 years or 4.5 years or 12 years that I live in this condominium unit. So why shouldn't I be paying my portion for the time I've lived there to help replace that roof? It shouldn't be just on the responsibility of the owners in 30 years to have a giant special assessment or loan or whatever to redo the roof as it ages out. So it's a fairness opportunity. It helps us financially plan for our community. It minimizes unexpected surprises. We have a fiduciary duty to do it. Boards have a fiduciary duty to notify members of what the reserve needs are and to be saving. Now, state statutes are different across the country, and some states require reserves to be studies to be conducted on some sort of time schedule. Some require that, but don't require them to be funded. Some require to be funded at certain levels. And so that's why you got to know what the statutory requirements are for the state that you live in, because they do vary. In Utah, where our first community management companies are, we have a standard that reserve studies have to be completed every 6 years. They have to be updated every 3 years, but an on-site visit every 6 years. It doesn't have to be done by a professional. The board or a committee could do it, which I don't necessarily agree with. I'd like it to be done by a professional. And boards have to annually at the annual meeting report on the status of reserves and reserve funding. They don't have to save. Say it says you need to be putting in $1 million a year. You don't have to do that, but you have to notify the ownership. The consumer is getting smarter all across the country, however, and they're going to look and see financials when they're buying a home or a unit in a association, and they're going to know whether or not it is if they're practicing sound financial planning. So what are some of the standards, the industry professional standards when it comes to reserve studies? A reserve study is comprised of two parts. One, the physical analysis. right? This is information about the physical condition and repair or replacement costs of the property components the client is obligated to maintain. Well, what are the components, right? That's the pool, the gym equipment, even in the gym, you know, the treadmill, the bike, the weights. It breaks everything, the pool liner, the pool tile, the pool deck chairs, the pool heater, the pool pumps. It breaks it into all those different components. A physical analysis comprises the component inventory. So we've listed, either through reviewing the governing documents or with our eyeballs, seeing it, all the different items, components in our inventory. And then what condition they're in and what the financial impact of that condition is. A financial analysis is the second part of a reserve study. The valuation analysis of the client's reserve income and expenditures. So now we have our component list, and now we're making, how does that affect us financially? And what's our funding plan? What's our contribution going to be to reserves? And putting those together, are we going to choose a percent funded or a cash basis? And we'll get into that in better detail. As a result of the Surfside Tower collapse, Champlain Towers, CAI went under a massive review of reserve study standards. Reserve study specialists don't have to be engineers. They're not looking at the building structural support and saying this is or is not healthy or safe. But they will list different items and give you a useful life. What the board does with that information, once again, and unfortunately the Surfside incident, boards had been telling their owners that they need to raise assessments to be able to take care of some aging building structural support systems, but the owners kept rejecting that need, not knowing the dire consequences. Obviously, no one knew the dire consequences. So, but is that a reserve responsibility? Probably not, but following a reserve study and following the standards set by the professional organizations is going to be a great first start. And this new publication, Reserve Study Standards, just published in the last month, is available for free. There's the QR code. I hope you have scanned that. Fully updated, fantastic information in about 30 pages worth of reading. Also, the APRA is the professional body of professional reserve analysts and standards of practice. And so you can, APRA is another set of standards, separate organization from CAI, kind of like an accountant can be a member of CAI, but they have their professional organization too, and attorneys have the bar. This is the professional organization for reserve analysts and those who do them. So who should prepare a reserve study? Like I mentioned, in the state of Utah, it doesn't require a professional. It says the board or a committee can do that work. A reserve study, I like this quote, a reserve study is a collaboration between the client and the reserve analyst that brings together the client's unique firsthand knowledge with the analyst's professional experience. It's the whole, my dad always used to say, garbage in, garbage out, right? If you're not making the reserve professional aware of a component and that it needs to be included, they might not necessarily know, especially components that aren't easily seen. So who should prepare a reserve study? Our professional experience says a professional reserve study provider, experts in the industry, unbiased third parties. It's a lot easier for me to go to an annual meeting and bring a report and show this third-party company says this is how much money we need to have in our savings to cover our long-term asset obligations in our association. CAI does have the Reserve Specialist designation, the RS designation. It's awarded to qualified reserve specialists who through years of specialized experience can help ensure the community associations prepare the reserve budget as accurately as possible. And how is it earned? They have to have done at least 30 studies in the last 3 years, have a bachelor's in construction management, architecture, or engineering, or equivalent experience, and follow the Professional Reserve Specialist Code of Ethics. What are different types of reserve studies? Well, level 1 full. If you've never had one, you need a level 1 full. This is with a site visit by the analyst. And they're going to look at all the components, put that together with you. They're going to do what condition are those components in? Painting of ironwork and rails in the community. Has it been done in the 10 years since community was built? If not, it's going to have a useful life of 0 years, right? They're going to do that and give you a life and valuation estimate on each component. Where are you currently with your status of funding? How much money do you currently have in savings, and are you contributing? And then what's the plan to have reserves funded? A level 2 is an update. So it's with a site visit as well, but they're taking the same information. They're not having to start all over from 0, and they're updating the information in there. The board needs to tell the reserve specialist, hey, since you did this study 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we've added some new things into our community that need to be in this study. Or we've gotten rid of some physical things that no longer need to be in the study. A level 3 update is without a site visit. So they're doing the same thing, but the reserve specialist is not coming onto the property to review things. Level 4 is a preliminary reserve study, and we're grateful for the great developers and builders that we work with across the country who are willing, because it's not always required, some states required, to do a reserve study based on paper plans. Here's the plans for the building, here's plans for the clubhouse, here's how many miles of private road and trails and sidewalks, here's the entry monuments, so that we can put it together and use that information before the community's first units even started to help build that initial budget. So it's as accurate as early as possible. We have tremendous success. I would say 97% of communities that have a preliminary reserve study, a level 4 preliminary reserve study, have adequate funding at the developer turnover time to the homeowners, where if it's afterwards, it just doesn't happen. People don't want to increase their assessments, but if they start off paying that, then they can generally 97% of the time continue to pay those amounts. You can also get preventative maintenance manuals, which are fantastic and help your community management team, help your association know some things to do, right? They say for every $1 you spend in preventative maintenance, you're saving $10 in actual replacement cost. And periodic structural inspections. So what came out of Florida and the statutory requirement there now is that they have to have, if they're a certain size building, certain age, they have to have periodic structural inspections. Whole nother skill set, definitely engineers involved. And and communities need to do that. The standards CAI has adopted says communities need to do that if they fall under those circumstances. So what are the requirements for reserve studies in your state? And once again, every state has different statutes that affect community associations in their states. And so just some of the statutes that in states where a lot of our partners and you, the viewers, are in, we've listed. And these aren't specific to reserve studies. These are a list of all the statutes that are affecting any part of community associations in these states. And you can find those on our website, those lists and hyperlinks to each of those. So what is the process for a reserve study? And here's a great chart from CAI. First thing, right? First box, establish, update the components to be included. Then the condition of the components, the cost to replace the components, or the current cost or the new cost, and then how much life is left, what the starting reserve balances are, savings balances, what is the percent funded, right? What is the strength of the money they have currently? Confirm what is your funding goal, and we'll go over different ones, set a goal, and then establish that goal over multi-year funding, and then prepare the report. All these different components have to be done for the reserve specialist to be able to do the report. So let's break these down then. Establish the components. Which components? People get confused sometimes. If some associations decide that they're going to have some typical reserve items handled just out of their operating budget. Well, where you pay for it doesn't matter. It's whether it has a useful life and needs to be repaired or updated or remodeled over a period of time. And so does the association have an obligation to maintain and replace? What's the need and schedule for these projects? And the total cost of the project is material to the association, can be reasonably estimated, includes all direct and related costs. Typically, lifelong components have an estimated remaining life of more than 30 years from the day of the study being prepared. So a lifelong component, if it concrete, should last 50, 60 years. If it is, or the irrigation system below ground in your community, those are going to last beyond the 30 years, and they're typically not included in a reserve study because they're a lifelong component. That's why we don't see them in there. Now, the reserve specialist is going to let you put anything you want into your reserve study. And if your goal is to save for those things, that's fantastic. And to use that as a guide. So there's other components that you'll see, but generally a reserve study is for the next 30 years or rolling 30 years. So if I had a new reserve study today, it's going to go through 2053, and at the end of the year, then 2054, and then 2055, because it's a rolling 30 years. Now, included in the reserve study, how much should you already have in your fund? How much should you be saving each month? A review of the governing documents, because in the governing documents, it has association responsibilities. It says, association, you own and are responsible to maintain and or responsible. You might be responsible to maintain things that you don't necessarily own. All that's in the governing documents, so they have to be reviewed. A site visit, obviously the eyeballs, and so they can see, and then an analysis of your current savings and how much you're putting in on a periodic basis, and is that going to cover the cost? You're going to get some different pages in your reserve analysis, the reserve study, and I just want to kind of highlight some of those that kind of breaks down to the nitty-gritty of what we're talking about. The component inventory is the big one, right? And I've put some stars in several of the areas, and let's see if, yeah. So the component inventory has, and I'm going to try to find my marker. Well, I'll just go over it because it looks like my animations have been turned off. But the components, obviously, are all the things, and I don't know if you can see my mouse. I'll put it up here. Your components are all your items, right? And then useful life, so components, common area, asphalt and concrete, asphalt drives, major replacement, asphalt drives, minor repairs, seal coat and traffic striping. Those are your components. Useful life, right? Useful life is how long should this component generally last for new. Asphalt, 30 years. And if it's not driven on very often with the minor repairs, seal coat, it could last 50, 60 years. Harsh weather, and we're seeing more hot, right? The country's going through a very hot spell currently as we're doing this program. And then followed here in the Rocky Mountains, we had a very harsh winter. All those things will age your components faster. But the useful life, when it's put on brand new, everything else considered is what that UL is. The remaining useful life is how long is it have left. So in this community, right, the driveway this community is only a year old. Still has 29 years of useful life in it. The unit price, how much did it cost to go in, and what's the total? How much square footage, square yards, linear feet of the component is there? And then what's the current replacement cost? If we had to replace 165,250 square feet of asphalt today at $4 square foot, I think if you multiply those two, you're going to get the current replacement cost $661. The anticipated expenditures, right? The anticipated expenditures are how much in 29 years when that needs to be replaced, how much is that going to cost to replace? So, right, the longer the time with inflation and cost, it dramatically increases. 2.5 times what the thing would be today is the estimate. And then what's the source? Your inspector's doing this, but sometimes we have the original invoice because we just put something in. There's different things that could be in there, but generally we recommend there's the inspection. So looking at asphalt drives, the complete replacement of the asphalt surfaces, that's important to see there. And then down here we have asphalt. This is trails. So trails put in the same time frame, significantly less in square footage, and that's how much it's going to cost to replace it over time. All right, sorry, my animation's not quite working there today. Then you're going to have kind of the same information, but it's going to be put into different summaries. And so we all see things, learn things different. But here's all your asphalt and concrete, your fencing and walls, and then it would be, clubhouse amenities, pool amenities, all would have different subcategories and the things in them, and you can quickly see useful life, remaining useful life, and therefore the effective age. Things are brand new, so a 1-year-old community. Then you're going to get a predicted useful life, and you're going to get a breakdown of what needs to be done on an annual basis. And the strongest associations are following this reserve study to a T and looking at it and saying, okay, now let me make this little blow it up a little bit. In this community in 2026, we're going to do, and they budgeted for some annual landscape repairs out of their reserves, which isn't necessarily a bad idea, $5,000 a year. Then the minor, the seal coating, the seal stripe sealing, traffic striping, they have that. And then in 2026, and then they've also put in some concrete sidewalk and flatwork repairs. You know, sometimes you have some lifting, trip hazards, and so they've put a little bit of money in their reserve to make sure that they're saving it each month. In 2027, once again, the annual landscape repairs. 2028, same thing, but in 2028 they're going to add, they're going to replace the bark in the playground. So you can see here how much money you can see in 2026 there, right? See if I can get my mouse over there. They need $80,000 approximately in their reserve savings accounts to be able to pay for the work that they're going to do. And you can see 2027, 2028, they're going to give you a 30-year breakdown. Now, can you see why it's important to have the reserve study updated on a regular basis, right? That things change. The price of oil affects asphalt. Labor shortage affects all building materials and trades. And so having update every 3 years is a minimum recommendation. Your state might have stronger requirements. Is going to help keep those costs intact. Now they could come down, right? When oil is $5 and gas is $5 a gallon versus $3.50, that's significant. And asphalt is a little cheaper right now than it was a year ago. So we like to do visual displays and for each of our community clients. And so this is kind of just showing the different years. Every 5 years, we're going to do that asphalt work. Every 10 years, we're going to replenish the playground mulch, more asphalt work because it's every 5 years. We're going to repaint railings, replace pool equipment. And every 20 years, pool and clubhouse refurbishment, irrigation upgrades, replace playground structures, and finishes exterior surfaces. And then those things repeat again in the 30th year. Now we're adding the roofs because that's done every 30 years. So using the reserve study, now you have this reserve study, how are you going to use it? Board, consult with a professional reserve analyst, a specialist, and review the governing documents to make sure they're all there. You're going to do this on a regular basis, make sure nothing's missing. And you're going to reserve the study each year. And there are new reserve companies that are now, it's all cloud-based. And so you get a subscription basically to your reserve study, and you're able to go in there and say, you know what? The pricing in real time, the pricing of asphalt has significantly increased. It's doubled, tripled. You can put that in there and make better decisions when you're budgeting based on that information. Because you can go in there and make those changes yourself. Then you're going to use the reserve study to inform the budgeting process and set up accurate assessments. Now, establishing a funding plan, right? An association's plan to provide income to a reserve fund to offset anticipated expenditures. It must be a minimum of 30 years of projected income and expenses. FHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, they look at communities' reserve health in determining whether they will provide secondary mortgage protection. So it does have a financing mortgage component to it. Here's the funding principles we're looking. Are you going to have the funds when you need them? Are you going to save like a little bit each year so it's a gradual, or are you going to, if you go this way and you're just down here, down here, down here, and then you have this big peak when you have your roof and then you go back, not good for your owners. And then being fiscally responsible, right? It is prudent that boards do reserve funding and get your owners to understand, buy in, and fund for future reserves. So what are the funding goal options? There's 3 in the industry: baseline, threshold, and full. A baseline funding is reserve cash balance approaches but never falls below 0. So if you need $66,000 in 2026, then there's $67,000 in the reserve account. But that's great, but what about those peak years, those 30 years, those roofs, when you need $3 million in there? Baseline then is the greatest risk because you don't have the money. You're not able to get $3 million in 1 year period of time. Threshold is reserve cash balance kept at a specified dollar or percent funded. So you're going to say, hey, here's what the analysis shows that we need. And now I'm going to go ahead and we're going to just always have 50% of what we need on the highest year. So if our total for our association, including that 30-year roof, all the annual landscaping, concrete work, redoing the playground, the pool on the schedules, and we need a total of $8 million over 30 years, well, we're going to, a threshold is we're going to say we need $4 million. Our goal is 50%. Okay, well, that's great, once again, except for that year where you have that giant roof expenditure. The lowest risk, full funding is that you have the $8 million in your savings that you need over the 30 years. This is the best one, obviously, but it's the hardest to sell because the owners are like, we don't need 3 million of that 8 million until you're 30. And so they kind of punt the need down the road, but full funding's the best course. Different states have different requirements. Talk to your reserve specialists in your state, talk to your community association attorneys in your state, or talk to your community managers in your state. Well, that is all we have on reserve studies. Kind of a micro into a reserve study today. If you've never had a reserve study, please let us help you connect with a reserve specialist today. You can at the CIonline.org website under credentialed directory of professionals. You can go in there and search those that have the RS Reserve Specialist designation. And also your community managers have the list for those in your area as well. Hey, if you appreciated today's program, and we hope you did, and we hope it was a good use of your time, please scan a QR code for your management company. They're not all listed, obviously, but the big ones, CAM, FCS, Legacies, and HOA Living Minnesota. Hi to our new Minnesota viewers this week. We are still getting that Google review page set up. So by next month, we'll have that, and you'll be able to put a review, hold those good thoughts until then. But the Minnesota website and social media pages are up. Obviously, that's how you found us. So we're excited that you're here in Minnesota. More state additions inside of our family of companies coming this year. All right, I'm going to turn the time over to our facilitators. And for the next few minutes, if you have a question, raise your hand and they will turn on your microphone. And the panel, the esteemed panel of one, will answer those questions, or will do the research and get back to you later. And so for that, remember August 30th, proactive communication in your association. And I appreciate your time today, and go ahead. If you got a question, put your hand up. Thanks for your time today.
All righty. So there are a couple of questions that have popped into the Q&A chat, so I do want to answer those. One of them just says anonymous. Sorry, we didn't get your name, but they're asking about what to do if a board is kind of looking at an amenity and saying, hey, it's not really used, we're not going to maintain it. We've seen associations say, hey, we've got a pool. The cost of maintaining that pool isn't really worth it for our community. And so they need to change that amenity into something that is usable. You can't just have an open hole in the ground. So they fill in the pool and they put a basketball court on it, or a volleyball pit, or a playground, or something like that. But those maintenance responsibilities and how those are taken care of are something that the board gets to decide. And then another typed in question was from Sharon. We're not a gated community, so the city maintains our streets. However, the main entrance, there's a brick apron. How do we find out who is responsible for maintaining that? So that maintenance responsibility should be discussed, or at least shown on your plat map, the survey data for what, all of the maintenance responsibilities based on ownership. So the plat map is the first place that I would look. And then after that, you may have to just call up the city and say, hey, how is this maintained? Because a lot of times the maintenance responsibilities are not necessarily the ownership responsibilities. Think of a park strip. The owner of the lot or home right in front of or behind that park strip would be the one who maintains it, but it's owned by typically whoever owns the road. All right, and then James has a question. Go ahead, James.
I just had a question about what level of inflation you've seen. If we look at our previous studies and now we're looking at it and it's a year or maybe 2 years old, what kind of inflation levels are we looking at?
Yeah, this is a great question that comes up. We actually kind of called a couple of reserve analysts on the carpet for that one to say, hey, 3% is not accurate in 21, 22, 23, and probably looking into 2024. And they said, yeah, for these years, inflation is higher, but the average does remain somewhere around 3 to 4%. And because you're looking at a period of time of 30 years, that average does still end up working out. Now, that only applies if things continue to maintain the same. If this inflationary period that we're experiencing does continue, then there is a potential for that needing to be adjusted. But so far, as they've looked at this and the horizons and kind of the expectations of where we're headed, they haven't felt the need to increase that rate yet.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions. So thank you all for participating. Hopefully this has been informative. Reserve studies are an excellent tool to help you in your fiduciary duty with your association. Have a great Wednesday.